Hey everybody, welcome to ARE Live. I'm Mark Thiel, the founder of Black Spectacles, and today's episode features Mike Newman, who's going to discuss the transition between ARE 4.0 to 5.0. Now, one of the really interesting things Mike's going to discuss is how you can potentially reduce the number of exams you take from 7 exams all the way down to 5 if you handle the transition sort of strategically. So make sure you stay tuned for that one. And before we get started, if you'd like to attend our next ARE Live broadcast, visit blackspectacles.com/podcast to register. And during the broadcast, you'll have a chance to ask questions and share your answers with Mike. Now, if you don't know Mike, he's an adjunct professor at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. He's also the founder of Shed Studio, and he's the instructor for Black Spectacles' online AIA ARE prep curriculum. If you haven't already checked out our AIA ARE prep curriculum, head over to blackspectacles.com to watch any of the free tutorials from the courses. And today we have 2 very special Black Spectacles promo codes to share, so make sure you stick around until the end of today's episode for those. But first, let's hand it over to Mike.
You may have heard that the architectural registration exam is about to go through a transition. It has been considered the ARE 4.0 for a couple of years, and before that it was the ARE 3.0 series, 3.0 and 3.1. When they went through that transition, they learned quite a bit, and they have done a lot of evaluation of the process and have gone through a number of different interviews and test-taking processes to understand what the best possible exam should be, and they've come up with a new version. So we're going to be transitioning from the 4.0 up to the 5.0. This is a kind of interesting moment in time because the 4 version has 7 exams. So those 7 exams are the Construction Documents and Services exam, the Programming, Planning and Practice, often referred to as PPP, the Site Planning and Design exam, which has a very large vignette in it about site planning, and the Building Design and Construction Systems, which people used to refer to as kind of means and methods. It's sort of the construction version of things. The Structural Systems exam, the Building Systems exam, so all the electrical and HVAC systems and plumbing and all that kind of stuff. And then the last one is the Schematic Design. The Schematic Design in the 4.0 version is the only one that's all vignette. So that's a drawing program where you get you are given a program, and then you have to answer a certain set of questions by drawing something out. In schematic design, it happens to be an overall building. So it's usually a 2-story building. You have to design it out. There's also an interior layout, which is a layout of a number of different offices in a fairly small, tight space, and has to meet all the accessibility rules. All of the other exams will have one vignette, but mostly be question and answer, kind of normal fill in the blank or ABC kind of questions. So this is one way of organizing the information. You can see like structures is sort of in its own category, and systems is its own category, and site planning issues actually shows up in a number of different ones, but is still essentially in its own category. So this is one way of approaching it, and it's been a sort of useful way for the ARE, the Architectural Registration Exam, to move forward over the last few years. But in their discussions with architects and with young architects and with people learning architecture, this sort of became a kind of conversation about, well, does this really represent architecture? Is this really how people think when they're in the architectural world? And the answer came back, well, no, it doesn't really make sense. What would make more sense is to take the information and put it together in a way that fits more to how architects actually think and talk and work. So the idea that you're going to just think about structures doesn't really fit to how it works normally in the field. Normally you're going to think about materials and structures and how they fit together and how they keep the water out and all of those things all in one conversation. The ARE 5.0, when it comes into play, will actually be organized differently. And in that process of organizing it differently, it's actually going to be, instead of 7 exams, it'll be 6 exams. So those 6 exams are practice management, project management, programming and analysis. So those 3 are pretty straightforward. Practice management, how does the office work? What kind of insurance do you have? All those kinds of things that are about your practice, your architectural practice. Project management is clearly about how do you make sure the project is going to keep moving forward? What kind of contracts do you use? How does a change order work? All of those things that are about that particular process in that particular project. Programming and analysis is clearly about all those things that happen at the beginning of a process. So maybe you're talking about site analysis or understanding the program that the client actually wants and being able to look at feasibility studies and things along those lines. It's all that stuff that's before design, but it's important to design. It's how do you have the data and the information that will lead to a good design. Then you move into two kind of interesting new ways of thinking about these things. And this one is project planning and design, and the second one here is project development and documentation. So what this is saying is all the design issues that you would have normally talked about under all these separate ones, building systems, structural systems, schematic design, all of those things are now falling under this. So it's grouping them all together. So we're going to look at maybe a structural question, maybe a systems question, maybe a question that works with both structures and systems, maybe a question that has this, pushing it all together. And the first one is about the planning and design aspect of it, and the second one is about how you communicate that. So it's the documentation and developing the documents in order to communicate that to a contractor, to an owner, to a code official, all of those people. So what do the drawing details look like? How do the drawings get organized? How do you have all that information in a logical way that can make its way through that set of systems? So this is a very different way of organizing the information than the 4.0 version was. Now, it's the same basic set of information. Structures isn't changing, systems aren't changing, schematic design, the basic issues of schematic design are still going to be the same. It's just organized differently. This will impact the way that people do their studying. It's going to impact the way that you take the exam. It's a number of different sort of aspects of this that are kind of interesting and be intriguing to see how it actually plays out once the change actually comes. And then the sixth one is the one that's kind of the most interesting to me. And the sixth one is the construction and evaluation exam. The reason why it's the most interesting to me is there really hasn't been that many questions, from what I know, on any of the previous, the 4.0 and the 3.0 exams, where there was a lot of questions about evaluation. So kind of thinking about post-occupancy evaluations, how do things work, how did that design really go? And I presume that a lot of this one will be more about construction administration than really evaluation, but that's the one that sort of seems the most open, this construction and evaluation, and that might be slightly different than what some of the previous ones have been. So one of the things you'll note that I didn't mention anything about vignettes, and that's because the vignettes are being phased out. So while you're taking a 4.0 exam, there will still be vignettes, and those will still be going all the way through the entire process of the 4.0. The vignettes are being phased out for the 5.0 ARE exam. So that means there will no longer be any drawing program that you are going to be drawing a whole project with. You're not going to draw a floor plan, you're not going to draw a section, any of those big drawing programs. There may be some different ways of thinking about this material. So one of the examples they've given so far, and there's lots of information on the NCARB site, it's totally worth going to check out. But one of the examples they've given is the idea of case studies. So they might, instead of having something that you have to draw where you get a lot of information and you have to translate it into a section or a structural layout or something like that, they might give you, say, a drawing of a plan and then a snippet of code and then maybe some spec material and some other information from the program, and then you would have to look at the drawing and make analysis and answer a whole series of questions about that grouping of material. So again, it's trying to make it not silos. So in the 4.0 version, it's sort of siloed. The structures is all one spot. The systems is all one spot. This is trying to say it's not about siloing it. It's about grouping it all together. So we have the planning and design, and what are all the issues that would go into that, and how can we talk about them all in one group? So it's an idea of a case study. And there's a couple other examples about how they might move through some of this information to be that multifaceted way. So this is going to be a different way of thinking of the exam. Like I said, it's the same basic content. It's just sort of a different way of piecing it together and thinking about it. From my standpoint, the vignettes, the drawing vignettes for 3.0 and 4.0 and all of that are kind of a little crazy, right? You have to learn this program. The program was designed a long time ago. It's not really how people use computers and drawing programs anymore. So it's a little outdated, and forces you to answer in sort of very specific ways, which sometimes feels a little awkward. And so they're sort of weird and awkward. The vignettes have always been not quite right. And there's reasons why they do it, because it's a way to get at certain kinds of information, and so it's a useful tool, but it's never been quite right. So getting rid of the vignettes, I completely understand as a reason to jump to the ARE 5.0. Like there's a logic there. Having said that, the sort of craziness of the vignettes is a craziness that we already understand. So there's a really strong desire, I think, for a lot of people, it's worth mentioning. Just because they're getting rid of them and they're a little awkward and all of that, doesn't mean that going to this new model is going to actually be easier. My guess is actually going to be a little bit harder. Now, they're going to work very hard to make it not be easier or harder. They're going to try to make it be the same. I'm sure they're going to work very, very hard to do that, but it'll probably take a little while for people to figure out, how does this really work? How do you study for this? Because the studying for it's going to be quite different, right? Now, under 4.0, what you're going to be doing is, let's say, use structures as an example. It's an easy one for people to grasp. So when you're getting ready to take the structures exam, you're going to do a deep dive into structures. You're going to pull out all your books. You're going to remember all your material from school. You're going to be looking for that particular set of information. You're going to spend a bunch of time really getting caught up on structures. Well, on the 5.0 version, it's now going to be mixed in with a whole bunch of other things. So you're not just focusing on structure, you're focusing on a whole wide range, which does make sense from how we think about architecture, but it may not be easier for you to study for. It may actually be harder to study for. So while it may be good in certain ways, it may be difficult in other ways. So this is something just to be aware of and to start thinking about, like how you want to play it. This is something you should be thinking from a strategic standpoint. When should I take the exam? What exams do I want to take now? What exams do I want to wait? And there's a couple of interesting little moments here that are worth mentioning. One of them is that if you are on the cusp and you're working in 4.0 and 5.0 is coming, if you're very clever, you can actually realize, if I do the first three here, construction documents and services, programming, planning, and practice, and site planning, if I take that and box it off, very quickly you realize that if I pass those three, I have then 1, 2, 3, 4 exams in 4.0 to get, but in 5.0, I potentially can answer all of the leftover content areas under these two. So I could actually do this where I do the first 3 under 4.0 and then do 2 under 5.0 and only take 5 exams. How about that? So you can actually game the system a little bit and do fewer exams. But like I said a minute ago, these exams are going to be quite different, and I don't know that they're going to be easier. If it was me and I had the time, I would probably just do the devil I know and get through 4.0 and do it right now and get through as much as you can. But you should definitely think of this in a strategic way so that you're really being careful. Like, there's no reason, if you're at that cusp, there's no reason to start doing some of these other ones like building systems, because you may have a hard time. Just if you pass building systems, I would still have to pass these 2 exams if I suddenly got transitioned over into 5.0. Now, there's going to be a long transition time. The 5.0 won't even start until late of 2016, and then you'll be able to still use 4.0, take the exam in 4.0 for, I believe it's at least 18 months after, but definitely you want to look on the NCARB websites just to make sure the information is current, because they're still thinking about it, still changing things. There's plenty of time. Even if 5.0 is started, you could actually take all the 4.0 exams in that 18-month period. So the main point here is the transition is coming, but really, if you can, you probably should just get it all done in 4.0. But if that doesn't seem likely, you want to start being strategic about which ones you take, which ones you're going to wait, so that you're ahead of the game. So another thing to say about being strategic, consider how it impacts your rolling clock. Consider which exam would make the most sense, which ones you feel comfortable taking first. Be strategic about the process that you're approaching. Think about how you're going to put together studying time for the multifaceted aspect of the 5.0. You want to just sort of go through all those different issues so that you have really thought it through. The rolling clock, as I'm sure you all know, is that idea that once you take one exam and pass that one exam, there's then a set period of time. They've gone through and changed that amount of time a couple of times, so I'm not going to, usually it's 5 years, but you should look it up and make sure that it's 5 years for you. But once you start taking one and you've passed it, then you start losing time before the next one can get passed. You have to pass them all in that 5-year period, and if that rolling clock moves past that, you lose the first one. Now you have to take that one again. Now that's important in the transition times, because if you lose one, that one may show up on 2 different exams now. And so under the 5.0, if you lost one under 4.0, it might actually be 2 exams that you have to take to replace it. So you got to be really careful about that rolling clock issue. So in the end, my big piece of advice, just do it. Just take the exams, get it done, try to go as fast as you can, get through the process.
All right, well, thanks, Mike, and thanks to all of you who've tuned in. If you'd like to attend our next ARE live broadcast, visit blackspectacles.com/podcast to register to attend. You'll have a chance to ask questions and share your answers with Mike for live feedback during that broadcast. And to learn more about our AIA ARE prep curriculum, go to blackspectacles.com. We'll also put a link in the show notes. And for those of you who want to get busy preparing for the ARE, you can use a 15% coupon off the first charge of any AIA ARE prep membership with code 52715webinar, which will expire on June 15th. And of course, if you're already an AIA member, you can visit aia.org/ARE prep to get a 30% discount for the entire duration of your AIA ARE prep membership, not just the first charge. This also expires on June 15th. And finally, please leave a comment below the video to let us know what you think and share any suggestions you may have. I promise we'll read every word that you write and use them to tune our next episodes. So thanks for watching.